to jump in, and I'm excited to engage this topic. And I think the first thing I want to explore with this group is understanding what are the dynamics that are impacting free play today. You heard that Project Play report. But when you're trying to understand what are the challenges, what's creating problems with free play, what would you identify as the key factors or key contributors to it? We'll start with you, Angela.
Yeah, I think free play, obviously, I think you have to first set the context. I'm a member of the International Olympic Committee, so I get to see how free play and organized sports is sort of unveiled globally. And so if you take just the context of the U.S., obviously I think there's this shiny object that a lot of parents see, which is a scholarship or a gold medal, or you can be a professional athlete. And I think, that exacerbates the need for organized sports and sports specialization. And I myself, I played college hockey, I played in 4 Olympics and benefited from that. But on the flip side, there are so few spots at the top. And I think in the U.S. at least, there's this obviously trend for that shiny object and less real focus on developing love of sports, developing, again, we talked about unstructured play, and which I see in contrast in other parts of the world where Norway, as an example, spends a ton of time not counting scores until really kids reach puberty, and then they say, okay, we'll start organizing, and then you look at that population and the love that those people have when they're adults. So I think part of it is just the structure of how we organize sports in America contributes, and so I spend a lot of time again looking at how we might think about best practices in other areas.
Yeah, there's an interesting paradox in your answer, because in many cases, countries like Norway, other places around the world have much more structured sports systems, yet within that structure there's a lot more free play. The US, the system is much more decentralized, but that's leading to kind of more organization that's happening at the grassroots level that seems to be crowding it out. Chris, what's your perspective? What are the trends that are most impacting sports participation, and specifically the decline or absence of free play?
I think Angela nailed it with the idea that parents are pushing their kids into, you have to get the scholarship, you have to get be in the NFL, be in the NBA, whatever. But I think the fundamental underlying cause that's driving that is a large income inequality within our nation. The fact that parents no longer have the time to be able to spend with their kids, to have them do free play. They don't have the money to be able to say, it's okay, you can just go out and play, we'll be able to cover your college. For a lot of parents, it's, you have to get this scholarship because that's your only way out. So if we want kids to be able to have free play, if we want them to just go out and run around and do things, we have to address the root issue, which is that the parents need to be secure enough in that they can afford for their kid not to get that scholarship. They can afford for their kid not to be a professional athlete, and that's okay. Until we address that, we're going to keep running into this problem with, it's you got to do it. You got to do it. You have to make that money. That's the only way we're going to get out. So we have to close that gap. Otherwise, we're just going to keep seeing the same things.
Vikram, what's your perspective here? What do you see as really contributing to the decline of free play and sports participation?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think one is access, and the second one is control. So access in terms of, as you've seen, the leagues become a lot more focused and pulling and asking kids to specialize at younger ages. And it pulled away from this notion of just being able to play sandlot baseball or football and sort of the environment that a lot of folks grew up with. And I think that is something that with technology now, that has sort of leveled that playing field in the sense that everyone's got a phone or some sort of device they can play with. The second thing is in terms of control. So again, you go back 20, 30 years ago, there weren't necessarily all these choices for kids. You wanted to go get out of the house, you had one option, which was to go outside and play. There wasn't a whole lot interesting things to do inside. Today, that's changed completely because of the number of entertainment options, from 24/7 TV to mobile devices. And as a result, that notion of a top-down mandate from a parent to go outside, that's a lot less appealing to a kid that has multiple choices.
Rich, what is the data telling you?
Well, it's similar to what Vikram was saying. Competition, to me, is the number one thing. 20 years ago, there was no competition for playing sports or watching TV. There was nothing else to do, so that's what you did. Now, there are limitless possibilities, and people are defaulting to, well, what do they default to? And that's where change is really hitting us. That as soon as you feel comfortable with doing one thing, there's something new that comes up on it. So there's no structure in the sense of expectation of a thing I can pass on to my kids, or more seriously, that the oldest sibling can pass on to the next one, because by the time the 12-year-old becomes a 17-year-old, something else is going on, and so there's no structure to that. And then finally, on free play as a whole, there are 3 levels. The first level of free play is true free play, where there's no rules, no structure whatsoever. Then there's structured play, and then there's organized play, where you're in leagues. And one of the things I think we need to be careful about in the distinction is understanding the difference between unstructured play, which is you go out and do whatever you want, which changes constantly, and that's probably more appropriate now. But where our greater opportunities are at that next level, where they're structured. They're playing baseball, they're playing hockey, and they're learning the rules. But because things change so radically, and for example, 40% of every 12 to 17-year-old says they spend most of their time online. So at the top end, you've got the professionalization. On the bottom end, you've got people who are just totally absorbed online. It's hard to get their attention. So competition and change.
To build on that, you talk about the competition, and you talked about online. It seems like one of the biggest sources of competition aren't necessarily new sports, but it is technology. When you think about the impact of video games or esports, games like Pokemon Go, how is that actually impacting the sports participation and free play?
Well, on the one side, we were, for years, I said video games had nothing to do with sports. I think that was true because it was really more crude programming. But by 2011, video games were so strong that our research shows quite clearly, roughly 35% of kids who play FIFA, which is a very popular game, played the game before they became fans of MLS. 15% played Madden before they became an NFL fan. So on the one side. On the other, I love this, and I think it is. If I was Pokemon, what I'd be doing right now is building an application that the whole goal was to get to a park. There are 500,000 parks in America. What if what you did is you go to a park, you do a thing. So if you play baseball, you get a badge for that. The more games you play in a park, the better the structure is for that. The more parks you go to, and it doesn't have to just be sports. Have a picnic, sit around, read a book. Doesn't matter, but get out and do things. So I think there's real promise and power in the technology to support true free play.
Well, we'll get back to that when we talk about solutions, but I think there's great promise also in the rich lucre avatar that can be part of that Parks and Recs function. Vikram, when you think about technology, how are you seeing its impact and participation? In many cases, the root development, the root kind of cause or inspiration for Pokemon Go came out of this perspective of how technology was affecting kids going out and playing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't necessarily look at us in the context of a team sport or necessarily an e-sport. And I think we're complementary to that in the sense that the goal is to encourage exploration and discovery of what's around you in publicly accessible places, whether that's a park, a library, or an interesting statue down the street. The idea is how can you enable that connection to place? There's no requirement to move at a certain speed. You do advance in the game by walking greater and greater distances, and so that's sort of a key mechanic that we're after. And so I think the idea is, what we found is that this is oftentimes a group of folks that want to get out and do something together with their family, or it's folks that typically maybe don't want to go organize into this group of 18 people to go play a sport. They just want to go down the road with a group of neighborhood friends and experience and enjoy what happens when you just bring people together and put them in an activity of some sort. That's not totally structured, but not entirely unstructured either. And so I think the idea for us has always been about trying to foster what our mission is, which is adventures on foot. And I think technology as a way to provide that spark that gets people off the couch into the real world around them, our view is that generally fosters really positive experiences that are social in nature.
To go back to you, Angela, it seems like one aspect of this, as you alluded to, was kind of the organized nature of the sports system here, where then, as I think Rich mentioned, the alternative is for kids to really not participate at all or really gravitate to these other alternatives. When you think about how organized sports has changed from the time that you were coming up within the system to become an elite athlete, and how you view the system today from the lenses and all the different organizations you're involved with, what explains the biggest changes that have happened since you were an athlete to kids that are growing up today?
Yeah, I think when growing up, it's, again, you had that sort of middle tier, I think I heard the less structured or organized play. Today, it's sport specialization. I mean, kids are getting signed up for sport, and that's the only sport they play, and that leads to over-injury and overuse and burnout. And again, back to this shiny object, maybe there's a scholarship at the end of the tunnel. So I think the change really is this specialization versus when I was a kid, I played lots of sports. I was encouraged to play lots of sports. I played outside. We even in ice hockey, we always said the kids in Minnesota, they were outside free play on the ponds, or kids in Canada had access to cold ponds for free, and their stick skills were better because they had time to be on the ice and just play. And whereas I grew up in California, so ice time was very expensive. I had a limited amount. My game might be a little different, a little bit more structured, and sort of focused on what was going on the ice. But I think the point is that because the system has become more specialized, kids just don't have that option. And I like the idea of technology as well. I mean, my company looks at technology every single day and its application in sports. And what are the ways that technology can bring communities together? So if kids can't afford to play organized sports, what are the ways that they're organizing? What are the ways that they're forming groups? What are the ways that it's actually, and bring parents together,
Right.
to be honest. I mean, that's what you do. What are the ways that we can actually get kids more active, whether through the lens of the coach, the parent, the national governing body, or the kids themselves to organize in an unstructured manner?
This point about parents is really interesting, and Vikram, one of the things that I'm interested in is it seems that parents have had this central role in decision making with respect to kids' experiences. But when you give a kid a smartphone, you're starting to give them a new role of empowerment. In many cases, the location of that decision of what they're doing and how they're spending their time may be shifting. What's your sense of that? What's your sense of how technology is actually changing where and how decisions are being made around participation in free play?
Yeah, I think there's always going to be that healthy debate between a parent and child in terms of how time gets spent. I think the difference is what options that kid now has. And as a result of technology, there are many more choices that they have in terms of using their free time. And so I think one of the great things that we've seen is that technology can sometimes be that unifier between different generations. The number of emails we got from parents or grandparents that were just looking for that activity to do with their kids or their grandkids, however it might be. Likewise, folks that formed habits where they were going for regular walks or hikes, and you sort of just needed a little bit of a spark or a digital enhancement to make that a much more enjoyable event, sort of a conversation starter, if you will. That is something that we found as a very useful tool, almost a byproduct of the success of the game, was that it was bringing generations together, engaging activities that got them out of their comfort zone. And I think that's something that for a lot of folks resonates, because there's that big activation energy to get off the couch or to change habits. And I think technology has that, especially with the game, that set of incentives that really push you out. And whether that's in pursuit of a character, whether that's your friend pulling you out to go do that with them because it's an interesting use of time, that's something that we found quite powerful about the game mechanic as it relates to technology.
So what we've heard is that there's a lot of different explanations, complex explanations for what's happening with free play. We're starting to see the promise of technology. I want to understand a little bit more about why this matters. And Rich, one of the things you're most known for is helping establish the connection between how kids are participating in sport or free play and the correlation that might have for them developing and becoming fans of the sport. And I'm curious to know your perspective, especially at a time where you have organizations like the NBA and the Junior NBA, where Major League Baseball is doing, or NHL is doing, as we've heard, when they're getting engaged more and more, what should they be thinking about? How can free play and the decline of free play, how does that translate into how kids are becoming future fans?
Well, so we collect data on everything in free time space, and there are 10 buckets. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you get the priorities. They capture everything. And the thing that's most important to remember in this is that the top 2 priorities for 30 years have been spending time with family and friends. So what you got to understand is our first desire is to be social. It's to do things with people. Whether it's mediated online or in person is not that critical. Actually, being a sports fan is right down towards the bottom, and only in the last few years have we added spending time online. That is on the bottom. It's not what we want to do. In fact, we see the online thing as a tool in this deal, right? That's not the focus. The focus is what I do that enhances my life. My life is defined by my relationships with my family and friends, and playing sports is at a much higher level of priority than the kinds of tools we use to get there. So the way I want to get back to this is it's about the relationships and the extent to which you remind parents of the values they had when they were playing sports growing up, and remind them why they have that St. Louis Cardinals tattoo, that it was a love of a relationship with the game and a family member and a friend that got them there. That's the key. The tools will take care of themselves. The programs will take care of themselves. But if you do it for what the behaviors are and the tools you use, you're gonna lose to the millions of other behaviors and tools that are out there.
Yeah, that's a really insightful point, and I think as we think about what we think about solutions, we have to think about how we cultivate that same sense of relationships in the context of those experiences. So we understand how it may connect in terms of fan development, but also in terms of athletic development. And Chris, when we talk about kind of the tremendous athletic achievements, and not to diminish my wiffle ball accomplishments, what you and Angela have done at different levels, still prideful about that. When you think about what you were able to achieve, how much do you look back and say, hey, the things that I experienced in terms of free play allowed me to become an elite athlete, or the teammates that you saw, and the connection between that and athletic development?
Yeah, well, so from my personal experience, free play was immeasurably helpful because growing up, I played only baseball and soccer. I didn't play football until I got to high school. And my parents had a rule where if it was light outside, you were outside playing, doing something. And so I was fortunate enough to have this, we called it the green belt. It's this strip of grass in front of our house where me and my brother and our friends, we could go out and just kick a soccer ball around and chase each other, throw baseballs at each other. Whatever we wanted to do, we were outside running around. If it had been up to me, I would have been inside playing video games because that's what I love to do. But I went outside and played sports. And so what I want to point out is that I became an NFL player not because I played football from the age of 5 all the way up to my professional career. I became an NFL player because I went out and played sports. And I happened to be blessed with the genetic lottery that allowed me to play at a very high level. But it wasn't any one particular sport that I was specialized in. And to be honest, playing baseball and soccer throughout, because I did play baseball and soccer from age 5 till all the way up through my senior year in high school, I was burnt out at that point. I didn't want to play it anymore. I did travel ball, I did club soccer, I was traveling all over the place to play these sports, and it sucked. I just wanted to go inside and play video games because I was so tired of having to do all this stuff. I wanted to just be outside and play with my friends because that meant I didn't have to do drills. I didn't have to do up downs or, dribble the ball back and forth for half an hour. So free play is super important because it gives kids a space away from that highly organized area where their minds need a break as well. Like, it's not just their bodies that need breaks, it's their minds that need breaks. And if you don't give that to a kid, then they're going to lose their love for that game. They're not going to want to do it anymore. So free play is absolutely essential.
Angela, you want to say
I just want to add to that because I think kids need both. Free play, when we call free play, it's being young, it's being playful. We had free play when we were elite athletes. I mean, the reason I played so long is because I loved hockey. That's the only reason I was able to play as long as I did. People go, how the hell did you do that for so long? I loved hockey. Organized sports, on the other hand, I think gives kids the opportunity to grow up. You learn about teamwork. You learn about life skills. You learn about setting goals. You learn about, picking yourself up when you lose and recognizing what you did well when you won. So I think having both actually builds, what we had. I think there's organized sports and professional sports, but the best athletes, I think, have both. And kids, I think, deserve the right to have both as well.
Yeah, you got to have that balance. It can't be too high in either direction. You have to be balanced between both. Otherwise, you're never going to make it.
So, and I think what we're seeing now is it's very clear that free play is important. It's very clear that right now that there are structural things that we know it's good for us in terms of sports sampling and the ability for having free play, but yet it's not happening. And so now I think we can explore, well, what role can technology play in being able to impact this? And I remember very distinctly the first kind of Project Play emails or reports that were sent out. There was a quote from David Drummond from Google, which was talking about that the youth sports ecosystem is ripe for disruption because there are all these things that are happening that no one thinks is a good idea, yet they continue to happen, right? The inertia of the existing system. Technology, I think, represents a promise for that kind of disruption. I think that's all of our backgrounds and experiences. So I'm eager to explore it. And I want to start with you, Vikram, and talk about the Pokemon example. And one thing I hope you'll talk about is the stats involved in the Pokemon Go success, because it's staggering and should catch everyone's attention. But what I'm really interested in is how is this concept of augmented reality, or AR, as you might hear it referred to, how can that impact the level of activity? And once they're actually active through a game like this, how do you sustain that level of activity?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in terms of just the stats, so the Pokemon Go phenomenon, if that's what you want to call it, 750 million downloads since the game was launched. And the last monthly number we reported was back in Q1, 65 million monthly active users still. So it's been quite successful in terms of, it struck a chord with folks, and for a number of reasons to answer your question. I think one is, sure, there was this novel AR technology, but I think equally important was the fact that the technology sort of fit with the brand, right? So people knew Pokemon, an entire generation of folks grew up with that. And that whole focus and narrative around Pokemon is, a human trainer walking into the world and catching Pokemon in the wild around them. Well, the game was an immersive experience whereby that was the focus of what the player was doing in the game. And so the glove just fit. And I think that's kind of what made it strike a chord with folks that grew up with that franchise. Then I think there was this idea of it being accessible, right? So, it's free to play. It's on a phone that almost everyone has. In their pockets. And then likewise, it's a shared experience. So it's everyone who plays the game, it's on a map. Everyone sees the same map. So if you and I go to the same place together, regardless if you're a level 20 and I'm a level 1, we have that same experience. And I think that allowed this sort of intergenerational play. It allowed group play and sort of the crowds that you have seen. And so that I think is sort of all combined or sort of interesting reasons for the game's success. And I think in terms of the way that you would keep folks engaged, what we continue to do is develop interesting features for that game. Most importantly is this idea of trying to encourage more social interactions. And so the idea that a group of 5 or 6 people can go together to a single place, have a shared experience, defeating a boss at that location that runs or owns that place. These are the kinds of features that we've developed over the last year. And I think, again, that notion of trying to keep that game in the real world with a shared experience, I think the technology is one part of it, but the other elements I mentioned are just as important.
Yeah, and when you think about what you're seeing in terms of especially those active users that are using this now every month, what do you have any sense of how that could spill over into kind of more habits for doing more and more things? Like, are you seeing that once people get a taste of the game, it deepens their involvement or their level of activity to suggest that it has that kind of increasing dynamic?
Definitely, through our partnership we have with the Knight Foundation, we're looking at trying to use augmented reality games inside public spaces. So for example, we've looked at ways, can you use a Pokemon Go as a way to draw people into the local library summer reading program? We did that in Philadelphia this summer. And likewise, we did some events with open streets in various cities, most recently Akron, Ohio. And what we found is that we bring a completely complementary demographic of folks into these places who otherwise may not go there as frequently. So in the case of these open street events, traditional group of folks that go there are people on bikes who understand the importance of mass transit or biking to work or what have you. Well, a lot of the players, this was a new concept for them, but they were excited to go to the event because of Pokemon Go. Once they were there, there's that aha moment, or maybe biking is a better way to commute to school or to work. Likewise with the library, library might have been a place that you go once or twice to check out some books, but if there's an interesting thing to go do there on a recurring basis, you'll be making multiple trips. You might pull in friends of yours that don't typically go to the library because there's a really engaging Pokemon activity to go do while you're there.
Right, and Pokemon Go is just the first game that you've all developed. What's I think exciting is to think about what are the other ways of taking the game mechanics and augmented reality to get people outdoors and have adventure on foot, I think is as you all refer to, if I got that right. Rich, when you hear about augmented reality, first, we know you're kind of the parks idea, and I think that's one manifestation of this. But when you think about how this translates into the data that you see, and whether this could actually be a form of play that has the same kind of benefits that your research suggests is so important for fan development and for kids to become lifelong participants, can that work? Can augmented reality work?
Yeah, and that was the strength of what happened with video games in EA over the last 10 years, and it's really a quite exciting development. The challenge is this. So on the sports side with FIFA and Madden, I think we have it figured out. You play the game, that's one experience you have. You become a fan of something other than the game, right? So it is the NFL or whatever, and then you play the actual game. I think the challenge we have in esports is the fact that right now it's self-focused, right? Most of what's going on in esports is based on the game itself, Pokemon Go, and we haven't figured out yet. I'm not calling this a fault. I'm saying we haven't figured it out yet. How do we turn it out? And I think some of the things like the library component you're talking about does that. But I think the answer is we have to be mindful to it. We have to be conscious and consciously intend to take these incredible augmented opportunities and say, what is the next iteration here? What does it lead to? How do you use it to encourage actual things that happen in real life? And always, always, always remind them how much they want to be with their family and friends anyway. So when you turn on Pokemon Go, go and do this instead. There are just so many options for what they do that we default. In the old days, we defaulted to watching television and following sports. You can't expect them to default to something. You've got to give them the option. And they're going to say, yeah, that makes sense. That's a natural thing. We haven't done that yet.
Yeah.
In esports, we're not doing it yet.
Chris,
with the exception of Pokemon Go.
Chris, as a lifelong player, lifelong gamer, and also an esports entrepreneur, when you think about esports, what do you think are the opportunities for that to spill over in creating an active lifestyle, in promoting free play, and in promoting kids getting involved in sport? What's that potential connection?
I think there's a fantastic connection for it, and it has to come from the teams and the owners of these esports teams. And so esports itself isn't necessarily Pokemon Go. This is more like League of Legends, Smite, Overwatch, Heroes of the Storm. Like, these are the games where kids are sitting and playing for 10, 12 hours a day. And what teams need to make those kids understand, what parents need to understand, is that you are better at these games if you are also physically fit, because that allows you to concentrate for longer periods of time. You may be sitting in front of a computer doing, mouse reactions, keyboard reactions, and you have to have reactions to do that. You're probably on par, if you're a professional esports athlete, you're probably on par with a baseball player, an MLB player, because you have to react within hundredths of a second. However, if you are physically fit and you're playing an hour-and-a-half game, you're going to be much better at the end of that game, which is where it's really going to count, than the player who hasn't been doing anything. And the example I like to point to is in the NFL, like, the 50s and 60s. There's all those stories of guys on the sidelines, right, drinking from hip flasks, smoking a cigarette at halftime, right? In our modern world, we would never do that, because that would impact your performance. So in esports, it's kind of the same thing right now. They're still in that kind of 50s, 60s mindset where, yeah, you can just slam 30 energy drinks during a day, and that's fine. Drink all the energy drinks you want. Good, go play games. But no, that's not good for you. That's not keeping you at a healthy level. And in order to play at an optimal level, in order to be the best, you have to take care of your body as well as being skilled at the game.
So it seems like we already had an education challenge, which is how do we educate kids and parents about the importance of sports sampling and free play. Mm-hmm. Now we also have to educate kids that are playing video games about the importance of working out to actually be better gamers.
Right.
Is there also a correlation the other way where the idea of playing video games also has a spillover in kids playing more team sports or individual sports, and how that makes them better athletes that way as well?
Yeah, Angela and I were talking about this kind of off stage, is that, for professional athletes and kids who are on the path to becoming professional athletes, sometimes you just need to not be an athlete. You need to kind of zone out. You need to go do something else. And for a lot of kids these days, that is going and playing a video game. It might even be playing Pokemon Go. It might be doing something just completely away from your sport. So if you have a kid who you think might be on that professional track, don't just make it 100% every day sport. Give them time to go do something else, and understand that their free play might not be running around outside with their friends. It might be building something in Minecraft with their friends. It might be playing a couple of matches of Call of Duty or, PlayerUnknown Battleground, whatever it happens to be. That is their free play. They're still socializing with people. They're still talking with their friends. It's just in a different environment.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had a random story where I was in Maine at a bed and breakfast with Brian Scalabrine, an NBA player who played for the Celtics and the Nets, and we're sitting in the table next to us. There's a couple arguing with their son. The mom is saying to the son, "You can't play video games anymore." And the father's sort of trying to defend the son, and the son looks all upset. Brian Scalabrine gets over, towering, 6'8", 6'9", walks over and says to the mom, "You have to let him play video games. That's how he's going to become an NBA player." And everyone looked shocked, and the kid had the biggest smile on his mind, and he's like, "I'm going to be able to play video games forever now." And the father was laughing, and he came over, and I was like, "I don't think you're supposed to get involved in parenting disputes like that." And he's like, "I was just trying to help develop his sports career." Angela, one of the things that's a common denominator that I hear here is this word experience. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about this at League Apps is, at the end of the day, when you're looking at Pokemon Go and why it works, it's delivering an amazing experience. It has a lot of the relational elements that Rich talks about as being so important to why people love sports. When we think about what the challenges of organized sports and the dynamics that that's creating, it seems like one of the problems is the experience isn't keeping up with what's happening in video games, what's happening in augmented reality. So when you think about what the solutions could be around organized sports and how organized sports potentially becomes a platform to facilitate more free play, what could that look like? How can the organized sports world actually be a means of solutions around free play?
I mean, you talked about it before, that technology is changing sports. It's disrupted every other industry. We can't be naive to think it's not disrupting our industry, sports. So other, Pokemon Go and other these gamification, esports, there are other ways, again, where kids are getting engaged outside of organized sports. And so I think it's recognizing that technology is sort of here to stay. What are the ways that we can integrate it in to make the kids' experience more meaningful? So it's not fighting where they're at, it's going to where the kids are and trying to figure out how to embrace them and not change them completely.
Right.
So there has to be obviously some discipline. I mean, if you're sitting in front of a computer all day, you know, you can parent and say,
Right.
we're going to sign you up. But I think it's recognizing again where technology can actually be beneficial and applying that. And the thing is, we all use it every day. Our habits have changed. You know, we might be wearing a Fitbit and tracking our calories or our steps, or talking to our niece and, you know, tracking how many pounds I mean, people are using technology now as adults. So I think it's trying to figure out what are the ways that we can focus, and why, you know, Pokemon Go and others have been and esports have been so effective is they are engaging.
Right. And one of the
When you
things,
look, just real quick, when you go to an esports event, I mean, I only learned about esports this year because it's a trend my company covers, and I was like, what? You pack a stadium and no one's looking at their phones. Everyone's looking at the action. And in a regular sports event, unfortunately, half the audience is on Twitter or sending messages. Right. So the way that the sport is actually structured is actually changing the way that people consume it. Kids engage with it.
Right.
You can't miss a beat. You have to be focused in these two examples. Right. Whereas traditional sports, you know, you can take a time out.
Right. You also wonder, I know one of the things that your innovation lab looks at is the idea of the quantified athlete. One of the interesting questions is does the kid become the game, right? Like, one of the things you look about video games, what appeals for them is the quantification, the levels, the game mechanics. Well, now that you're tracking and the ability for all this data to be tracked, I wonder if there's elements of video game that starts to filter into actually the world.
I mean, as a professional athlete, that's what we're doing is at the elite level. And again, technology will, I think, democratize the ability for everyone to have access to this information. So we say quantified athlete, we mean anything that's monitoring, measuring, predicting performance. And that could be steps, that could be your heart rate, that could be your hydration, your sleep, all these things you can actually quantify now. That, again, as elite athletes, our coaches, our trainers are measuring and helping us be better. But that could be an interesting way. Kids could be engaged, just like we are, going, oh, how many steps did I get today?
Right.
Maybe that's a way kids go, did I drink enough water? Oh, let me measure my hydration patch. I mean, it's trying to take what's going on at the elite level, and through time, I think these companies are going at the elite level. The market they want is everyone else.
That's where the business interests
and that's where I think it's moving.
Yeah.
So, quick aside, in our locker room, in the Vikings locker room, we had this Nike vision test thing. It was like this touch screen where, you know, flash balls up to help guys improve their reactions. And we turned it into a game. We were always competing against each other. Who can get the fastest time? You know, by getting these things. So, like, it's absolutely possible to use tech to incentivize kids into doing things that normally they wouldn't otherwise do. Make it a game. Make it fun for them.
And that's the difference. It's a game. It's not just you doing it independently.
Yeah, I'm not doing a drill. I'm playing a game.
It's using it to have fun, compete, understand, get better. And not everyone has to win, too.
Yeah.
You can be competing with yourself.
Seems like the whole idea of badges, right, connected to video games, well, that started with the idea of getting trophies when someone played sports back in the 1800s or 1900s. So the mechanics that are making those games so successful probably have its roots in our sports system. It may just be we've gotten away from understanding how to continue to evolve those elements. When you think about, Rich, to go back to you, we talk about esports, we talk about augmented reality. We have stakeholders here, for example, from leagues or teams, other organizations that care deeply about participation. Do you sense that the same kind of, if someone's playing an esports game and that leads to them getting exposed or becoming a fan of a sport or introducing themselves to a sport or something like Pokemon Go, does that have the same kind of spillover effect in the fan development as someone who's just playing soccer on the field and becomes a fan of the MLS?
Well, in fact, it can be better. I mean, if you haven't played Madden recently in the video game side, anybody who plays Madden knows what's going on Sunday when they're watching football 50 times more than somebody who doesn't. And the other side that strikes me about this is you have to remember we have the first real generation gap where the kids do know more than their parents. This is the first time play is being introduced by kids to the parents, and maybe one of the advances here is development of games for parents to help them get up to speed to where they can do what the kids are doing. But the answer is, there are all kinds of things that could be done here that would enhance the value for the individual sports because of the sophistication and the quality of presentation. The caution is this, poker, right? If you look at what's going on now, in poker, we thought in 2000, 2005, everybody was getting them for holiday gifts, getting poker sets, and were huge. And I was asked then, how long did I think it'd last? And I said, probably 2 to 3 years. They said, what? As soon as everybody knew how to play an 8-5 offsuit, they didn't need it anymore. So in other words, we're spectators to esports as long as they're teaching us. As soon as we know everything, there's no real reason to watch. And the things I'm hearing, I'm the oldest guy in this person on this panel by a long shot. I'm thinking, man, there's a lot I could learn from the things you're saying. It just never occurred to me because it's not generationally appropriate. What's appropriate for the parents to get mental acuity? I'm thinking of that because, I'm going to get to that point where I can't remember my name. I bet if I play these games, I'd be a lot better off. So there are a lot of bridges that could be built with esports to get everybody on the same page to understand the technology and how it relates to the actual playing of the game and being a fan.
So we're about to go to the audience questions, but Chris, I'll ask you very quickly. When you think about this question of accessibility, it seems like one of the advantages of esports or Pokemon Go or thinking about where technology fits in is the promise to be able to impact all kids, not just those that can most afford it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the huge things with sports is you look at the reason why soccer is such a global sport. All you need is a bare patch of ground and a ball. Like, it doesn't even have to be a ball. It can be socks rolled together and you're kicking it around. As you go up kind of the sports hierarchy, you get into like football and hockey and you need some very specialized equipment in order to do that. Well, right now, computers, smartphones, those are becoming very standardized technology available to many, many people the world over. So the barrier to entry is very, very low. Yeah. So that means lots of kids can play these games. Parents should know what these games are so that way you can talk to your kids about them and make sure you understand what your kids are doing. And then if you see they're focusing too much on any one particular thing, say, okay, now maybe go outside and kick a ball around because you have to have that balance. It can't be one or the other.
Perfect. Well, I think we're going to audience questions. I have no idea how this is going to happen or whether someone's just going to speak or whether or not we run out of time. So maybe there's someone from the Aspens too. Let us know. This is kind of a pickup panel. So do we have any questions from the audience? Is this going to magically appear? Yes. We have a microphone. We're going old school analog. Please talk to us.
So, yes. So the question that the audience voted in, how can kids who want to find others to play with find one another? What are some tech solutions?
Yeah, so it's a great question, right? When we talk about participation, is there ways that when we used to play with our friends on the street and organize a game, what's the promise of technology to facilitate that kind of pickup? I know we've thought a little bit about that, but Angela, what's your take in the Sports Innovation Lab? How can technology actually allow kids to self-organize?
I mean, you just said it. That's what it does. It brings communities together. It's not the end, it's the means, right? So what I did is knock on the door, go around the neighborhood. Hey, you want to organize a game? Right. Again, there are many, many examples, and I'd turn it over to you. I mean, there are companies that are doing this for a living that now recognize the value in bringing parents together, bringing kids together, and again, it's the means to the end, which is like getting kids active.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is, if you think about the structure of organized sports, it's an interesting place to root a solution that facilitates kind of lightly organized play. I think if when Rich said this at the very beginning, he had this structure of true free play, structured play, and organized play. And so maybe in that structured play category, someone in organized sports has access to facilities or space, and they have supervision and equipment. And if you have those two things, and you allow kids to self-organize in that context, it seems very, very powerful and a mechanism to allow parents to feel safe, but also allow those kids to really be creative and organize their own games. And I imagine within Pokemon Go, you're building out more and more features that facilitates that kind of self-organization.
That's right. I mean, so in technology, what you have is data, and I think that enables you to facilitate those kinds of connections. And so the analog being back in the day, we would go house to house and knock on doors. Well, today you sort of know who are the players that are at a certain skill level that would be qualifying for a certain experience in the game. And maybe this experience is only suited for players that are over a certain level. Yeah. You can facilitate those introductions through the smartphone in terms of notifications or text messages or what have you. So those are the kinds of things that our technology companies can go do, is sort of facilitating these what would otherwise be serendipitous connections and actually make them intentional.
Cool. Last question. Well, just because I've been told it's time, we have a one-letter answer, not even one word, one letter. What grade would you give stakeholders in the past year for reintroducing free play in youth sports? Rich, we'll start with you. What grade?
Incomplete.
Incomplete. Vikram?
B+.
I told you my answer earlier, but you can't really grade it because free play is different based on the sport. For a physical athlete, it might be going to play a video game. For a video game athlete, it might be going outside.
You're grading the questioner.
Yeah, I'm grading the questioner.
I'm going to say average, so I'm not. So again, on our scale, I'd be a C, but average.
I'm going to punt the question, but I'm going to give Aspen Institute an A+ for organizing today and for this panel. Thank you very much. We appreciate it.